Can we get some applause for Tim and Jamie and the team for such a impressively run inaugural event? Very impressive in terms of organization stuff. Second, I'm Jake Wang with BizMetrics, do a lot of consulting investments.
I'm Mike Paralak. My background is locating and regulatory.
Thank you. As we go through this discussion, if anyone in the audience has a question or topic you want to throw up, please just raise your hand and then we'll call upon you and you can yell it out. Mike, this industry, again, traditional, what's on your mind these days?
Well, we've talked about maps before, but I'd like to take a deep dive into utility maps and their role in damage prevention. From a technical standpoint, there's only three ways to locate underground facilities. One, a locating instrument, electronic instruments. Two, visual observation. And three, maps. And for the most part, maps are given only to locators, not to excavators. What do you think the future will hold? Will excavators ever get maps?
I hope so. And we've seen excavators get maps in some other countries, Canada, Australia, New Zealand, and there are no, too often we fear what might happen if excavators get maps, right? What I call the Die Hard 2 scenario, right? The terrorists take over the airport with cutting into the communication line at the church near it, right? But I don't know of any incidents that's actually happened like that. So I hope we do make those available to excavators. And I think that will reduce damages and help them be more efficient and safe. And by making the maps more readily available, that will also improve the maps. Because one of the arguments against sharing maps is, oh, it's not perfect, or it's not great, or it's very much less than perfect. But by not sharing it, by not using it, it's never going to improve. There's no incentive to improve it.
Right. Excavators not having maps mean that they have two of the three tools. If they had maps, they'd have the same information or availability to the same information that locators do. I know we talk a lot about the future of one call. Generally, it comes down to one of two things. One, there's things we can improve on the margins to make one call a better system. And of course, sharing maps with excavators is one of a number of things that we've talked about in the past. But I'd like to get your read on maps of the future. And is it possible to look at AI as being a tool that's going to provide our industry with a lot more and a lot better information?
I think the answer is definitely. And with AI, one of the quotes I love and I use a lot, maybe too much, is perfect is the enemy of the good, right? So too often when we talk about AI or new methods of getting maps, whether it's 4M or some other company, new methods of creating maps or collecting maps or whatever, people are like, well, what's the accuracy? Is it, how do we know it's accurate? How do we know it's perfect? I'm like, well, so few things in life are perfect, right? And the standard shouldn't be, is it perfect, but is it better than what we have right now, which often is nothing because the maps are not shared. And so I think that's definitely the way we have to go. I talked with, in preparation for this session, I talked with many stakeholders here, and they talk again and again about maps, sharing data, and I think the industry wants it.
Yeah. Well, if we're not talking about how to improve the existing system on the margins, we're talking about blowing up the existing system because it's 40-something years old now and has lived a useful life, but doesn't seem to be particularly helpful in what we project is going to happen in the future with the amount of construction, the difficulty finding people within the construction industry, which includes the locating industry, because really locating is construction efficiency. I mean, we call it damage prevention, but that's a narrow slice of what it really is. It's about moving forward with the least amount of problems possible. So, I'm going to throw something out at you. I heard this, and it made a lot of sense to me that in the future, everybody will be a sensor. And it doesn't matter why you locate, if it's verifying one-call marks, if it's doing private locating, if it's 811 locating, no matter what, that if everybody's a sensor, every bit of data that's collected is going to go somewhere. And over time, we'll go from not a lot to more to a lot, and then once we're a lot, we'll go from somewhat accurate to pretty accurate to very accurate, because no matter where you go, inputs into the system are happening. Today, there are really no inputs into any sort of system. So if we look at, the one call's outlived its usefulness, we need a new system. That new system has to be built around, I don't understand how it could be anything else, but it has to be built around the collection of data about where underground pipes, cables, and conduits are situated.
Yeah, I think that's exactly right. So I think the analogy is with Google Maps and Waze and the traffic information. So when they first came out and they first showed traffic information, like you're trying to get from point A to point B, what's the most efficient route? The traffic information wasn't that useful because there were not enough people using it, right? Now, the traffic information is shockingly accurate because there are so many people using Google Maps and Waze, and their speed, where they are in their speed is a lot of data points, to your point, right? A lot of data points we upload into the system. Everyone's a sensor, right? It's the Internet of Things or Internet of People, and it's impressively accurate. So I think when we start down this path, yeah, there's gonna be like, that road collected by these two data points, these two sensors, as you put it, is not very accurate. But okay, we're starting off. I think after a few months, a couple of years, people will be shocked by how accurate those sediments of data, from all these sensors get with the help of AI.
Right, in the pre-Google Map days, in the late 80s, early 90s, high school, grade school, elementary school teachers on vacation were hired to go around and see what the street names were in new subdivisions, and was that donut shop, what's its name, and where is it? And just to collect data, really by line of sight, just what you saw. And that stuff was compiled into a repository. But today, the amount of data that's collected, I'm using somebody else's analogy, but if Arby's is closed, 50 people report it the day it's closed. It's crowdsourcing information. So I like that term in collecting, underground utility data, crowdsourcing it. We have a friend who is crazy smart, and he's been working on a system for 12 years, but essentially what it would do is it would allow everything to be located at once. We're very used to in this industry that I'm locating this line from point A to point B within a special geographic area, whatever the extent of a ticket is. That's how we think. Even if the signal goes somewhere else, well, that doesn't worry us. We don't care because our job is to locate this one thing from point A to point B within a ticket extent. But can you imagine if you can capture every piece of data, whether it's sent from a transmitter begins at a transmitter or begins at a power plant or any other sort of RF transmission that's out there, metallic utilities will pick up this, and the field that comes off of these energized lines can be detected by sensors on city buses, police cars, Ubers, whatever it is. I mean, there's mobile applications for everybody's a sensor, but there's even the possibility that any crew who does anything anywhere can have a device that simply collects information. And the cool thing about what I see with this is that people don't need to know much more than turn it on and walk where you normally walk, and you're collecting data. And as you mentioned before, the more that it all ends up in one place and keeps getting layered and piled upon, pretty soon you have a lot. And I guess that's coming back to the AI, which you know more about than I do, but there's the possibility that one call centers may not be the repository of data, that private enterprise is collecting data at such a rapid rate that this data will be available for purchase for excavators, planners, designers, engineers, without anybody setting out into the field with the specific mission of finding out where this line goes from A to B, and then repeat the process, either with that person or another person or people. So that's crazy to think that the one call center in the future could be outdated because it doesn't have anywhere close to the amount of data where utilities are located than private enterprise. And think of how many miles of abandoned utilities there are. And you don't go about trying to locate abandoned right now in our 811 system, but if you had 10 lines and the facility owners, 10 lines on an image, and the facility owners can account for 6 active lines, that means these other 4 things stand the potential of being in conflict. And when people expose this through their excavation, they don't know whether it's alive or dead, but the fact is, if you know that it's there ahead of time, nobody's claimed it, it's not 100% guarantee it's abandoned, but we know there's abandoned stuff on every block in every town in the United States, and now we have a location that we didn't have before, and we didn't go out of our way to try to find the abandoned line. That data came to us because everybody's a sensor.
Right. I think there's going to be a role for the 811 centers for a long time, and the role will and probably should evolve. Right? They may or may not. Some want to, some don't want to be the repository of all this data from the sensors, right? But I think there's going to be a role for a long time for the 811 center to be like the hub, the traffic cop, if you will, traffic director, which is great. I think again with the data is people have to. If we think back to a few years ago, I remember a friend of mine when I started using it. Some of us are old enough to remember this, like MapQuest, right? MapQuest was high tech back then, right? I was using MapQuest for directions, and they were like, haha, look, MapQuest got this part wrong. I'm like, I know, but it's not perfect. But so, my friend was like, yeah, that's why I still use the paper maps. But what people forget is, for a lot of these technologies, it's not where it's at right now, but its trajectory, right? Where is it headed? So where that was headed, where MapQuest was headed was, it's getting more and more accurate, and the devices that run them, the smartphones, without RTK, just the GPS chips on the devices are getting more and more accurate. So I'm no longer on the other side of the road, and I'm on the right side. So it's a trajectory. I think what's going on in this industry, if you look at the trajectory of a lot of these technologies, right? The smartphones, the laptops, the GPS getting more and more accurate, the data, the sediments of data building up, the AI, the processing power to analyze, process, and layer and kind of integrate all this data into what is most likely to be right. All of those point to kind of what you're talking about, which is of those 3 kind of points, right? Locating, visual, and mapping. Mapping will become more and more valuable, and a bigger and bigger part of those 3. And one last thing is, I think if we think about locating, right? When people hear locating, too often they think, okay, so locating is basically going out, finding something, and then putting paint on the ground, right? Where that underground facility is. I think when we think about, if we deconstruct that and think, well, what really is locating? Locating is communicating from one party to another party where the facilities underground are, right? And right now, paint on the ground is that method, but does it have to be that method?
Right, and maybe it's going to be a survival of the fittest as far as one calls go in the future. Those with the vision today that start incorporating some of the things we're talking about today may be, on the survivors list. I know the company that operates Kentucky 811 is involved in a project by the name of Sumdex that essentially going to start collecting data from locators as they fulfill the requirements for the 811 tickets. One Call Concepts has a platform in which they can deliver information to those impacted by where things are. It's interesting. Maybe that's the first time we can see mapping on the fly that has some usefulness in future damage prevention. But I mean, that's just the beginning, but it's weird that it's taken so long for that beginning to happen. Why is the utility industry, and in particular, you know, the utilities pay for the 811 systems in all the states. They're the only funder of the 811 system. Why is it, Jimmy, that utilities are, I don't want to say necessarily resistant to change, that's probably not a bad way of saying it, but why are they slower to adopt technology that's all around us that isn't in the development stage? It's there now and could be used in our industry. What are the reasons? I mean, your opinion.
Yeah, it's a great question. I think there's several answers, right? One is the simplest answer is some or many of the utilities are largely, I'm not saying entirely, largely content with where the system's at right now, right? They're largely content, and if I adopt additional technologies, it could cost me more money. If some of these technologies, I could lose some control. So if you think about your comments about the data and contractors getting data, the utilities, the owners, are going to necessarily lose some control, right? So they're like, you know, they're control freaks for better and for worse, right? So they're gonna lose some control. And third, I think, is kind of fear of the unknown, right? And fourth is what I call the wildebeest syndrome, right? Like, you know, you watch the nature video, right? There's all the wildebeest on the river in Africa, and they have to cross the river. If they don't cross it, they're going to starve. They have to cross it. There are crocodiles in the river, right? And they're all standing there. They're waiting for the first wildebeest to dive in. That guy gets whacked, right? And then as they get whacked, oh, okay, crocodile's over there. Okay, I'm going to cross here. So they're all kind of like wildebeest on the river, waiting to see who the first 2 or 3 get whacked, and then, okay, this is a safe route. So they don't want to be the first one, and they're kind of conservative by nature that way.
Right. What about regulatory pressures? You see regulatory agencies pushing utilities to adopt technology quicker. And let me just, we haven't talked about this. I mean, we don't plan or script these conversations, but you and I had a conversation that we haven't talked about ever. And that was earlier this year when we talked to somebody from PHMSA in the rulemaking side of the business. And in general, the idea was with enhanced positive response, and of course this only affects the things that PHMSA has jurisdiction over, so the transportation of hazardous materials, pipeline, natural gas utilities. So the idea was that with enhanced positive response, at that point that the excavator goes to check on the status of the job, if complete, there is a map that they can download. Okay, so right now, we already covered there's not a lot of map sharing out there. But what if excavators get that kind of map in that enhanced positive response mode from the one call centers? Now, isn't that, in this hypothetical, isn't that an example of regulatory pressures on facility owners to adopt technology that right now they're not adopting? In other words, they're standing on one side of the river wondering who's going to get whacked first.
Right. It's kind of interesting that I think sometimes the regulatory pressure can help the adoption of technology, and sometimes it can prevent it. So you mentioned the word sharing of maps. And right now, pretty much everyone in this room has used ride sharing, right? Uber, Lyft, or whatever. Or Airbnb, that's called vacation home sharing. But what if you own a vacation home on, say, Lake Michigan. It's $1 million vacation home. And I came to you and said, Mike, would you like to share your vacation home to strangers? Just share it, be kind, share it. You're like, wait, why would I want to share it with strangers? The answer is no. But if I went to you and said, Mike, would you like to rent out your vacation home on the weeks that you're not using it for $8,000 a week? You'd be like, of course I'm going to share it, right? Sure, why not? So I think one of the missing pieces in this industry right now with regards to data and the sharing of data is, I think when we think about the sharing of data, we replace data sharing with data renting, right? So data renting, you have data that could be useful to me, and I'm not expecting you to just give it to me or share it for free, but I want to rent it from you. It's like your vacation home, right? I think that will, having a market like that, it's like Uber, Lyft, Airbnb, a lot of these things that made it possible for owners of assets to be able to, quote unquote, share or rent them. I think we need that service so that the owners or possessors of data maps right now are more willing to share it or rent it out.
Yeah, interesting. I did want to continue on one regulatory issue that we spoke about briefly here earlier, and that's the pre and post inspection of sewer laterals when trenchless technology is being used to install new plastic gas mains. So I got involved with a project called Digging Dangers for a number of years. And one of the accidents that we had, and I want to say the year's 2004, don't quote me on that, but it happened in a suburb of St. Paul. And the typical cross bore, nobody knew something was there inside the sewer lateral. It took years after the gas was drilled in for the sewer to start backing up. Homeowner, when encountering the backup, called the plumber. Plumber augured, got the clog, but also got the gas pipe. And a couple of houses took on damage. That one house with the clogged sewer was damaged pretty good. And what that did was, that was like the third time. There were 6 crossbores that have been identified by Minnesota Office of Pipeline Safety, but 3 of them had resulted in some sort of property damage. And somebody at MinOps said, this is enough. From here on, if you have ever drilled in a pipe, you're going to check your records, you're a Minnesota gas operator, and you are going to inspect these sewers. You're going to look at people's sewer laterals. You're going to access them. You got to go in the house, you got to go in the house. But you are going to come up with how many there are, and you are going to inspect them. And that started a new kind of locating that was at $0 annually the year before, and has increased today to, I can't even guess, I don't know, but it brought about new inspection camera trucks, the lateral launch trucks that didn't exist before, but otherwise you're having to access the sewer with a push camera with the technology that was available today. So this whole locating thing happened with regulatory advancement in one state. And it spread across the country. It's really pretty amazing. I think regulators have, I agree with you that not everything they do is magic and has the desired effect, but ultimately there's enough things that they can have, should, and will do for the future that will change our damage prevention system. And a lot of that, I think, is going to revolve around doing things that don't even exist right now. And I guess we'll wait and see on that, but it's the only entity, a state or a federal regulator, it's the only entity that can essentially make a gas utility do something they weren't, a gas utility because of the federal, we're down to pipelines and gas, but can make the companies do something they weren't planning on otherwise doing.
Too often there needs to be enough large enough and acute enough of pain, if you will, right? So we saw that with, unfortunately, in Lexington, Missouri, where a life was lost. And I think just a few months after that, Missouri legislature enacted changes in the law, right? And it's very unfortunate it took that, but I think often if there's not acute or significant enough of pain, like the legislators are going to be legislators. We got bigger fish to fry. It's unfortunate, but I think that's what happened there. But what do we do? I was talking with some of the Kentucky 811 people, and the volume here apparently has doubled in the past 7 years, right? And the ticket volume. How does the industry keep up with that in terms of damage prevention, locating resources?
Well, a good question. I mentioned regulatory at the beginning. That's a volunteer job I have. I'm sitting on a 5-person advisory board, state of Illinois. ICC has jurisdiction over all utilities to enforce what's known as the Julie law. So from my experience there, I have kind of seen a lot of things, and I've watched the results of certain types of things. And one thing that I've been convinced of is that you can't find your way to get a result that you're looking for. Now, maybe you can get quite a ways there, but late tickets, there was a big problem, it still is a big problem in Illinois with late tickets. So that may or may not be an issue here in Kentucky. If they doubled the volume and haven't had a commensurate increase in locating folks, maybe it's an issue here. I don't want to assume stuff that I don't know. But the problem isn't, we're doing bad, and if you find us enough, we'll do better, and we'll get there in 2 business days or whatever. That's just not going to work. And the reason it's not going to work is that where we're at culturally and socially, finding people that want to do a certain type of job, and I'll say generally, outdoor work for utilities, which includes locating, it's not that easy. And once people do actually take the field, many of them find this isn't what they want, have to be out in different kind of conditions and have to be on call and that sort of stuff. So I look at it as an issue that that technology needs to solve for us what we can't do in putting a sizable enough and competent enough workforce out there in the field. Now, this is my opinion, but the damage prevention industry is made up mostly of locators. I mean, if you look at it, how many people are in damage prevention? Well, 90-something% of those people, 98% of those people are people who locate. So if you can't get enough locators, the system isn't going to work as intended or as it once did. So I'm not sure, again, I think it's got to be faster adoption of technology that solves the manpower issue that we have. I'm certainly, not the psychologist like we had earlier who knows human nature and such, but I just don't see that changing in our favor.
What about making the system less rigid, more flexible? I talked with a contractor here who said, if I were allowed to locate for my own work, I would do that. I'm like, okay, what about liability? So I'll take liability because I'm just getting delayed too much. And then I spoke with a major utility here, and I'm like, okay, what do you think about allowing contractors to do their own locates if they're qualified? They go through OQ, all this stuff. They said, yeah, I have no problems with it. I'd advocate for it. I'm like, what do you think the executives at your company would be for it? He said, yeah, I don't see why not. So we have programs like that in Alberta, the ALP. Georgia has started something like that.
Ontario.
Right. What about something like, is that a good first step, kind of baby step in that kind of loosening up this rigid monopoly, if you will, that the facility owners have to locate their facilities?
Absolutely, because both, I don't know much about Georgia, other than what you've told me, but in both Alberta and Ontario's situation, harsher winters than what we have in a good part of the United States, construction seasons more compressed, they never had enough people to locate and the tickets kept going up. So it was because there wasn't a sufficient workforce to handle the ever-growing load that these programs came out. Now, you talk to some excavators who say, I'd be willing to do that. You give me the maps and I'll take on liability. You might have some other, well, I know you have some other excavators that would do that, but hey, I'm not liable now. And then you have, there's certainly excavators that, nope, we're not a locating company. That's not our expertise. I don't want anything to do about it. I want the utilities to fix the issue that they have with getting out on time.
But some of those excavators probably have locators on staff just to check what the utilities and their potential contract locators located.
Yeah, well, I remember in the early 80s when I started in the utility business, it was a requirement if you're going to put in new phone drops for general telephone, you're going to locate the existing general telephone. They're not going to send a locator out to locate stuff that you should be able to do because you're out there doing field. It would solve a lot of the manpower issue because somebody who's working either directly for, as an employee of a contracting or excavating firm, or for a firm that that excavator has contracted with, you now have an aligned interest between those who are locating and those who are digging. The communication can be exceptional because you're on the same team. In the 811 system, the locators aren't on the same team. And I think that's, you know, if we have to all of a sudden solve a manpower issue, it's going to be something like we've been discussing, where the contractor, the excavator, has locating resources at their command, that they can advance with their work to the same degree that they can locate conflicts in front of that work.
Right, because they are the customer, the contractor is the customer, and the recipient of the product, right? So this is a question I ask a lot. You know, you heard it before. Like, who is the customer of the system right now? The 811 damage prevention system.
Well, I learned since talking to you to answer it like you would, and the customer's the utility company because they're the only one paying for it.
Right, because the definition of customer is someone who pays for a product or service.
Right.
Too often when I ask that question, they're like, oh, you know, the customer is everyone, or the customer is the public, or the customer is the contractor, excavator. I'm like, how many of those pay directly for that product or service? It's like none of them. So the customer of the system right now are the utilities, but the recipient of the product, you know, the paint on the ground right now, are the contractors. So I think that's what you meant by there's the misalignment of interest in that the customer of the system and the recipient of the product are not the same.
Right, and what I should have said all along, I mean, I used to say the excavator's the customer, they're the one making the request. They're the ones being provided information based on their request. They're a de facto customer, but they're not a real customer. And you know, you've talked a lot, I mean, we've talked a lot in these Barstool conversations about excavators don't need to call in 10 tickets, but they do. Why? Because they can, when 5 would have work. You know, I mean, that sort of ticket overload stuff because it's free.
Because it's free, because they're not the customers, they're not paying for it.
Right, and I just sitting here thought of an analogy. I live out in the country, and you know, just getting high-speed internet had been a problem over the years. And one of the services we used had a hard data limit, where once you hit that, you had to pay. And they didn't tell you, hey, you've hit it. You just started paying, and it was enormous. And so I learned to really just make sure, always checking that daily.
Or use your neighbors.
Yeah, right, exactly. We don't have neighbors. You're right, just always check. Today, I have unlimited, I don't worry about it. And the TV, I leave my TV on 24/7. Why? Because it doesn't cost me anything. It's human nature, and I think that's what we sometimes maybe need to focus on in our industry is what is human nature and where does human nature sabotage our efforts to conduct construction jobs that involve underground excavations in a safe and efficient manner.
So what about this idea? Let me put forth a potentially controversial idea. What if instead of calling in or submitting tickets online were free? What if we're no longer free, but what if the submitter is charged $1 or $2 per ticket, right? Just not because $1 or $2 will make a huge difference to the whole ecosystem, but because that will make the submitter think twice if they submit a ticket if they were actually going to use it.
Yeah, it's a great hypothetical. You would think, there's no way somebody would change what they're doing at $2 a ticket. But yesterday I went and did a car wash, and I could have had the $14 Premier Edition car wash, but I chose the $12 one because that $2 for whatever in my head, from a lifetime of always scrimping and saving all that, it's like, no, I'm not going to pay that extra $2. So here's the thing. I do think a small amount of money, which you say isn't going to change the economics of damage prevention at all, would change human behavior. And it's just an example of, we know what human behavior is in our industry. What can we do to change it that really won't impact a whole lot, where we don't need new laws, and that's one of two things that we always talk about: tweaking things on the margin to improve this existing system to get along better, or is it a matter of it's simply going to implode, or it's going to get blown up somehow, and we're starting all over with a different system? It's one or the other, but I think the $2 a ticket is one of these things along the margins that can take the original system and get more positive results out of it.
So the intent of, let's say, $2 per ticket is to reduce or eliminate people calling in tickets that they're not going to use. And I've had some people say, well, what it will also do is discourage people from calling in legitimate tickets. So my pushback was, wait, let me get this straight. You're working on a $5,000, $10,000, $50,000 project, and you were going to call in a ticket because it was free, and now you're not going to call in a ticket because it's $2. So what are your thoughts on, will it discourage people from calling in a lot of legitimate tickets? Like at $2 or $1, $1.50, whatever it is.
I don't see how it could possibly. Myself. Some of these $1,000 an hour crews out there, and from an efficiency standpoint, forget liability. If you hit something, if you hit a water line and there's water, you have to stop, you have to move, you have to tear it out. You can't go forward with what you're doing. Nobody wants that. I don't care. Nobody wants that. You want to be efficient, to go as fast as you can, be as profitable as you can. Everybody expects there's certain limitations that might affect our ability to efficiently move, and some of that stuff is late tickets or inaccurate marks or incomplete marks or what have you. But if these instances were the exception and not the rule, I think most people bite the bullet on that and move on without saying a lot. But in areas of the country where this might be every other ticket where you encounter something like this, I feel for the locating forces, I feel for the excavators. They both have situations that are sometimes beyond their control, but when we look at it being a manpower issue primarily, if we choose to look at it that way, then what you end up with when you put the $2 a ticket on, or $5 or $10 a ticket or whatnot, is not, you can't even imagine a cost that would change direction a project flowed, because, I can't call one call now, I don't want to spend that $75. Well, you spent $75 sitting here thinking about it the last 30 seconds. So I don't see it, Jimmy, but I know that a lot of people believe that, and I think it's unfortunate.
Yeah, I was talking with a major multi-state utility, and they told me, I think it was like 45% of their tickets were resubmits, right? Just refreshes. And they said, and something like 80% were for work that was already done like 8 months ago. So they just had someone in office like every 2 weeks, every ticket that was called in 2 weeks ago, just refresh it, right? Because it costs zero.
Yep.
So if there was some nominal amount, not $75, but like $2, they would think twice about that, right? Whereas right now it's $0. It will cost me more money to have you figure out which tickets are still active than to just refresh all of them. But if it were $2, it's like, okay, Mike, figure out which ones are still active and refresh the ones that are still active, because I'm paying $2 for each one.
Yeah, absolutely, yeah. One of the things that we're doing here is doing it with an audience. We haven't done that before. And I don't know how we take questions, but we certainly don't want to talk about only our stuff. So please, sir, go ahead.
So one, I don't hear it get talked about a lot when it comes like the locators, contractors, and utilities as being like separate divisions of who does what. So where we work at Boardwalk. We handle our own locations, our own locates. No one else is allowed to locate our utilities. It's just us. So it's solely us who are responsible. And on top of doing that, we're doing our encroachments. We're working valves. We're working our stations. Like why don't more utilities just take that on their own role and not to sound like a piece of crap, but just cut the locator out of the picture in total, and then take responsibility for their own utilities being located.
Great question. And Boardwalk and Pipeline, right? Yes, sir. Yeah, okay. Well, the pendulum has swung both ways over the course of my almost 40 years of watching this business, and it seems like we are seeing some facility owners take locating back in-house, and clearly it's more expensive than what they were doing previously. But I was talking to a gentleman from Urbant here who I've known for a while earlier today, and he had a great point that one of the things that I think all facility owners share is they don't want to be in the news. They don't want bad stuff to be associated with them. And I think that the pendulum is swinging in such a way now that more utilities are considering taking their locating back in-house, although it is clearly much more expensive. But you have to ask yourself, what is the cost that we don't normally associate with outsourcing locating? Can we add that to what we know our outsourced cost is and come up with a total price? And I'm not dissing third-party locators at all, because they're swimming in a pool right now that's full of sharks, and it's not an easy thing to pull off. But as Jimmy alluded to earlier, some large utilities, let's be honest, appear to be just very comfortable with the system it is today, because they feel like they are above the chaos and they don't have to deal with this kind of mess day in and day out like the people they contract to. But Jimmy, your thoughts?
Yeah, so great question. I joke with Mike, he and I are the only ones who can do this, because a lot of other people would be afraid of getting fired for some of these comments, and we're already unemployed, so we're unfireable. Here's the way I would answer it. The utilities that are insourcing that work right now are almost exclusively the regulated utilities, right? Gas and electric. And their locating costs are essentially straight pass-throughs. So they're not paying for it out of their P&L, generally speaking, right? So if their commission says, hey, you should take it in-house, or if they're not getting results, they're like, hey, I need to spend 3 times more to locate in-house, and the ratepayers pay for it. So they're like, okay. The unregulated utilities are like, wait, this comes out of our P&L, and our current setup with the contract locator is perfectly fine. We seem to get decent results, and I don't want to take it in-house. So the ones who are taking it in-house seem to be fine with it because they're spending other people's money, right? And I'm not slamming it, I'm just saying they're spending other people's money. And the ones that are happy with it are spending their own money. They're like, no, I'm getting decent results right now. And the contract locators, I have some background here. The contract locators are, the analogy I give people is they're like Ticketmaster, right? They have kind of two jobs. One is to locate, right? Like Ticketmaster, they have two jobs. One is to sell tickets. The second job these two organizations have in common is to protect their customer from the public's ire, the public's anger. So when tickets are late or whatever, hey, it's a contract locators, right? It's not me, I'm doing whatever I can. Ticketmaster, why is Taylor Swift tickets $800? Oh, it's gotta be Ticketmaster's making $750 of it. Poor Taylor is only making 50. No guys, Taylor's making $790, right? Ticketmaster's making $10. But their second job is to shelter Taylor Swift from the public's anger. So that's why they're perfectly fine with it. The ones who are still outsourcing. So any other questions?
The system and charging people to input tickets, I don't think is so much going to affect larger companies that are putting in multiple tickets a day. I think they'll still call them in, but I think it's going to affect the smaller people, as in like farmers and locals and small businesses. One of the biggest things that I push when I talk with people about 811 is, that's the main statement is it's free. So I feel like if anything is going to be affected, it's going to be your smaller companies and your homeowners and farmers and stuff like that.
No, you're absolutely right. We've discussed the wisdom of separating the one-call system into two groups with two different entities responding based on the ticket type. One is homeowner. Simply homeowner, single ticket address. That in some one-call systems is a pretty large percentage of all the one-calls, but the right-of-way is particularly busy. Urban right-of-ways is where most of our issues are. That's where the problems with mislocates, abandoned utilities, time-wasting late tickets, time-wasting things for the excavator. In this world where the one call now covers homeowners, farmers, things are free, that wouldn't change, but we'd take a big part of the chaos in locating and assign it to either, I'll call it private locating for right now because most people understand the concept of private locating. They can be hired to locate anything and everything that you need to do your job safely and efficiently. But your thoughts, Jimmy?
Yeah, so let me ask this, Mike. Let's acknowledge that if we charge $2, some nominal amount, there might be some entities who are calling right now who'd be like, oh no, that's outrageous, right? The $2, I'm not gonna call in tickets anymore. Let's acknowledge that might happen, but what's the benefit of that, right? Knowing some proprietary numbers, I reason to believe maybe 35 to 40% of the tickets are gonna go away. Not just from people who legitimately need them, but just tickets that are not needed, they're not worked on, right? And they're called in because it's free. So if we look at the cost benefit, let's say the cost is some people will not call it in because it's $2 and I'm not gonna pay that. The benefit is we might be able to take 35, 40% of the noise, the unused, unproductive out of the system. Wouldn't the benefit be far bigger than the few people who are like, I'm not gonna pay the $2?
Yeah, no, absolutely. Seems so. So I bought my wife a tree to be planted for her birthday in July. And when I paid for the tree and the $275 for them to come plant it, they told me, well, we'll call in Indiana 811 ticket for you, but it's probably going to be about 3 weeks. That's where they're running right now. And so as somebody who has been, the average person who understands the concept of 811 being free has been subject to advertising by all 61 calls or how many ever there are, that, call us 2 days, 3 days, 3 business days, whatever it is, before you plan on excavating. So I understand that locators are backed up, and when they said it'll probably be 3 weeks, so what? But what do the homeowners, the farmers, the others that the gentleman mentioned, what do they think when, oh, it's going to be 3 weeks? Well, wait a minute. I see the billboards when I drive into town that said, call 2 days before, click 2 days before. So I'm sure one-call centers, I know one-call centers worry about their image and how their message sometimes seems to be in very deep contrast to the reality, what people get. So again, no matter what you do to try to solve some of today's issues, there's going to be some bad, and we project to be quite a bit of good. But I think on balance, if our projections are right, and we can take that 35%, that 40% of ticket mess out of it, despite it being bad in some small ways, overall it's a humongous benefit.
What percent of the people who are told it's not 2 days, but it's 3 weeks, what percent of them are going to start work anyways?
A lot. I mean, from a non-professional standpoint, I'd say a lot. From a professional standpoint, for the professional excavator, I'm not certain. I mean, I just don't have any basis for an opinion on that.
Right. So if you had a magic wand, Mike, we're coming down the stretch here. If you had a magic wand, what 2 or 3 things would you do with your magic wand in this industry to improve safety? But I think also I think too often we come to these and we only focus on safety, which is very important, but I think productivity, efficiency, because for the end users, for the recipients of the product, the contractors and excavators, right? I think any system where we forget about efficiency and only focus on safety is not sustainable, right? So what are 2 or 3 things you would do with your magic wand?
Okay, well, I would, some of this stuff is going to involve legislative changes, and sometimes, harder than it looks, right? But I would let those people who want to locate their own do it. Absolutely. I very much would want to have utility maps made public within the excavating community. Absolutely. I know for a fact that if you have paint and flags and something to look at, the same thing that the locator had, you can catch errors and omissions. You can come up with questions that you wouldn't have otherwise. Might cause you to call in a second request. Somebody said this in one of our roundtables, nobody ever complains about having too much information. And excavators need more information. And utilities and their contractors are huge excavators. That's where I worry sometimes that, when we say, because it certainly seems that many utilities are okay with the system as it is, but they have to deal with the same things. They're contractors, they're their own people when they dig that anybody else does, and just maybe the noise isn't loud enough. I don't know, but so we're for those who want to hire, yes, and they move on outside of the system, still with liabilities in place, but able to match production with production, aligning of interest. Number 2, public sharing of maps within the industry. Not saying you have to put it on a billboard, but this is the extent of my ticket. I don't need maps showing, the regulator station at the edge of town. What I need is wherever my dig extent is, I need to see maps there. And third thing, and this is a personal thing just because I've been with so many people through training locators, I would like to see professional accreditation and recognition for those people who locate. I think that there's nothing at all bad that can come of that. It needs to be done in such a way, though, where the people themselves feel good about it. They take pride in their work, because frankly, a lot of locators right now, they're not recognized as being skillful. They're not recognized for their contributions to excavation, safety, and efficiency. And I just think if we can do as an industry something that makes these people think more highly of themselves, then all of a sudden you've got a recognized trade. You've got the ability now for people on the outside to look at what the locator does, who's now confident and thinks highly of what they've accomplished and what they do in plying their trade. I think that's huge. Starting 5 is an NBA show on Netflix. I just kind of got turned on to it. But here's professional athletes and guys like Tyrese Halliburton. I forget exactly who said it, but let's just say it was Tyrese. But he said, what makes a difference between the team leaders, the stars, and the rest of these professional athletes is they never, ever have anything but the highest confidence in their ability. They want the ball at the very last second. So applying that to locating, what do we do as an industry to really just recognize locators who are 95 to 98% of the damage prevention? What do we do to give them career paths and make them want to feel good about what they do and therefore stay in the business and having, that's why I say when locators I know who work for construction, they're perfect. They love it because they are respected by the crews because their crew sees what the locator does for them.
So one last point of question.
Isn't part of that? You want me to stop talking? Did you cut me up? Okay. Isn't part of that because the customer of the locators is not the recipient of their output, whereas at the construction company, the customer and the recipient are the same, the construction company. You know what I'm saying? So if I'm the customer, I'm paying for you to do something, and I'm not getting an output. Someone else who, frankly, I don't care about is getting the output. I just don't value what you do, right? I'm just paying for you to make this thing go away. I'm paying you to be ticket reader.
Yeah. Well, I got on my soapbox there a little bit, but it excites me to think of the possibility. But you told me a couple of years ago it's probably not going to happen, because it's outside of. The utilities are comfortable with the way things are, many of them, and therefore, why put effort into doing something that's not really going to change things? And I think that's sad. So you asked for, what are your 3 things? I guess we're wrapping up here, so what are your things?
I agree with your 3 things. Those would be 3 of my top things as well. I want to thank Mike again, and I want to thank Tim and Jamie and the team and all of you for watching, participating. And this has been an amazing conference, especially for an inaugural conference. Please give yourself all a round of applause, please. Thank you.